At U-boat Command Headquarters in Courneval, France, the afternoon sun glinted off Capitaine Sauce Eberhard Gott's monocle as he studied intelligence photographs on May 17, 1943. The images depicted what Americans were calling aircraft carriers, though the vessels looked more like improvised merchant ships with flight decks hastily attached. USS Bogue appeared in the photographs, a ship that had been operating for 8 months, but was only now drawing German attention. The sight of this crude construction actually made Gott laugh out loud before he handed the photographs to Contra-Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg, whose expression mirrored his own contempt. That evening, Gott recorded his thoughts in the war diary, noting how Americans were constructing carriers from merchant ship hulls. He wrote that these floating crates equipped with just a few aircraft posed no credible threat to German wolf packs. Compared to fleet carriers, these vessels lacked speed, armour, and proper naval architecture. To Gott, they represented nothing more than desperation given physical form. Neither he nor Friedeberg could have imagined they were examining the very weapon that would destroy them. The diminutive escort carriers would accomplish within 18 months what seemed impossible, transforming the Battle of the Atlantic from a German advantage into such a complete Allied victory that U-boat crews would begin calling their missions suicide runs. American shipyards were already writing this transformation into reality through Henry Kaiser's production lines, where escort carriers were being built faster than Germany could construct submarines. German naval officers would undergo a psychological journey from contempt to terror, not gradually over years, but rapidly across mere months as they discovered American production logic had surpassed anything their imagination could conceive. The true beginning of this story reaches back to June 8, 1941, 18 months before Pearl Harbor, when President Roosevelt recognized something his admirals initially dismissed as fantasy. America required aircraft carriers in vast numbers, yet fleet carriers demanded 3 years to construct and cost what 10 destroyers would. Roosevelt's answer seemed ridiculous to traditional naval minds on both sides of the ocean. Convert merchant ships into carriers, manufacture them on commercial production lines like automobiles. These converted vessels would inevitably be slow, vulnerable, and limited in capability, but producing them in such overwhelming quantities would render their individual weaknesses meaningless. When Captain Friedrich Rouge, serving as naval liaison to the German High Command, examined the initial American escort carrier specifications in early 1942, his professional incredulity was evident. Maximum speed barely reached 18 knots, hardly faster than a submarine running on the surface. Some models featured wooden flight decks. Commercial-grade steel replaced proper armour plating. Single screws made them vulnerable to torpedo damage. Rouge's analysis for Admiral Raeder dismissed the entire concept, writing that Americans seemed confused about the difference between quantity and quality. He predicted these maritime disasters would provide easy targets for trained U-boat commanders. German naval confidence rested on substantial evidence. Between September 1939 and December 1942, the U-boat force had destroyed 1,299 Allied ships, representing 6,266,000 tons. Admiral Karl Donitz's Wolfpack tactics had transformed the North Atlantic into what Churchill identified as the only aspect of the war that truly frightened him. U-boats operated with near impunity, surfacing at night to pursue convoys using diesel engines that provided 17 knots of surface speed. Aircraft represented the primary threat to submarines, but land-based planes couldn't reach the mid-Atlantic gap, that lethal stretch beyond aircraft range where U-boats congregated to slaughter merchant vessels. On March 3, 1943, Oberleutnant Zersee Herbert Werner, commanding U-230, recorded his assessment after his first encounter with an American escort carrier near Convoy SC-121. He described sighting what looked like a merchant ship carrying aircraft on its deck, too slow to pose any threat and too small to accommodate a meaningful air group. Werner maintained surveillance for 2 hours, observing what he characterized as amateur aircraft operations with visible difficulties in wind conditions. His report to BDU suggested American desperation had reached the point of sending merchant ships with planes into combat zones. Werner's contempt reflected standard German naval doctrine, which failed to comprehend three crucial factors. The escort carriers didn't require speed because they travelled with convoys moving at 8 to 10 knots. They didn't need large air groups because their aircraft only needed to force U-boats underwater, reducing submarine speed from 17 knots on the surface to 7 knots submerged, preventing them from reaching attack positions. Most critically, Americans would construct so many carriers that aircraft coverage would extend across the entire Atlantic. By spring 1943, production statistics that would seal the U-boat force's fate were accumulating, though German intelligence drastically underestimated the numbers. Henry Kaiser's Vancouver-Washington shipyard had compressed construction time for Casablanca-class escort carriers from 6 months down to 10 weeks. Through standardizing components and applying assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturing, Kaiser's workforce could launch a new escort carrier weekly by summer 1943. German estimates placed American escort carrier production at perhaps one monthly. Reality approached one every 5 days during peak production. Captain Lieutenant Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, experienced his first glimpse of what mass-produced naval aviation meant on April 23, 1943. His boat ran on the surface 650 miles southwest of Ireland, well within the mid-Atlantic gap that had previously been safe. The lookout's warning sent the crew scrambling. No land-based aircraft could possibly reach this position. Then Kremer spotted them. 2 Avenger torpedo bombers approaching from the northeast. His war diary captured the confusion perfectly. Aircraft appeared at an impossible range from land. They must have come from a fleet carrier, yet no fleet carrier had been reported in the area. He initiated a crash dive. Depth charges exploded close aboard, causing minor damage. After surfacing 2 hours later, he discovered the convoy included a converted merchant vessel launching aircraft. His diary entry concluded with a question. How many of these ships did the Americans have? Had Kremer known the answer, German morale would have shattered. By May 1943, the United States Navy had commissioned 11 escort carriers with 40 more under construction. Each carrier operated between 24 and 30 aircraft. The pilots were mostly reservists, civilians just 2 years earlier, who had trained in abbreviated programs that horrified traditional naval aviators. These amateur pilots flying from merchant ship carriers were about to accomplish what the Kriegsmarine had declared impossible: complete suppression of the U-boat threat. Rear Admiral Julius Führer, reviewing German naval intelligence reports in June 1943, noted increasing frequency of U-boat encounters with carrier aircraft in areas previously considered safe. His analysis, discovered in captured documents after the war, showed growing concern. American escort carriers were now being reported in the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, and Mediterranean approaches. Intelligence suggested at least 20 operational vessels. If accurate, this represented a fundamental transformation in convoy protection capability. He recommended immediate reassessment of Wolfpack tactics. The reassessment arrived too late. USS Bogue and her escorts had already initiated what U-boat crews would later call the extended Black May period. On May 22, 1943, Bogue's aircraft spotted U-569 running on the surface. The submarine crash-dived, but the Avenger marked its position with a smoke float. 4 hours of coordinated attacks followed. U-569's commander, Captain Lieutenant Hans-Peter Hinch, surfaced his dying boat long enough to transmit a final message. They were under continuous air attack. Carrier aircraft were maintaining contact despite evasion attempts. No escape was possible. He was scuttling. Admiral Donitz himself reviewed the message, initially suspecting British deception. Only after 2 more boats reported similar experiences did reality begin penetrating German naval consciousness. Continuous air attack had been impossible in the mid-Atlantic, Yet experienced commanders were reporting precisely that phenomenon. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Rudloff, commanding U-709, encountered US Escort's aircraft on June 24, 1943. His subsequent report revealed the tactical revolution underway. Carrier aircraft attacked him 700 miles from the nearest land, forcing him to remain submerged for 14 hours until his battery was exhausted. When he surfaced at night to recharge, aircraft immediately detected him with what appeared to be detection equipment. The aircraft seemed to have unlimited persistence. He requested instructions for dealing with continuous air coverage. No instructions existed because German naval doctrine had never contemplated continuous air coverage in mid-ocean. Operating in hunter-killer groups with 3 to 4 destroyers, each escort carrier could maintain dawn-to-dusk surveillance over a 100-mile radius. When multiple escort carriers operated together, they created overlapping zones that made surface operations suicidal for U-boats. American escort carrier technical capabilities significantly exceeded German estimates. Each Casablanca-class carrier displaced 7,800 tons and measured 512 feet in length. The flight deck could handle 20,000-pound aircraft landing at 80 miles per hour. The hangar deck accommodated 28 aircraft with maintenance facilities. Ammunition magazines held 500,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition plus depth charges, bombs and torpedoes, sufficient for 2 weeks of continuous operations. Corvette Captain Adelbert Schnee, one of Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders, encountered this reality on July 13, 1943, when U-201 was caught on the surface by aircraft from US Escort. His post-action report revealed his shock. Aircraft appeared without warning, leaving no time for a proper crash dive. He went deep immediately and heard multiple depth charges. After remaining at maximum depth for 6 hours, he surfaced after dark, only to be immediately illuminated by aircraft with powerful lights. This pattern repeated 3 times. The aircraft seemed to know exactly where he would surface. What Schnee didn't realize was that Corps' aircraft carried ASV Mark III radar capable of detecting a surfaced submarine at 15 miles even in darkness. This equipment, combined with Lee lights for illumination and acoustic homing torpedoes, meant darkness no longer protected U-boats. U-boat crews had always relied on night surface operations to recharge batteries and make speed to attack positions. Now every moment on the surface invited death from above. The production miracle enabling this transformation defied German comprehension. Kaiser Shipbuilding produced its 50th escort carrier, USS Casablanca, in November 1943, just 18 months after laying the first keel. The ship was constructed in 101 days from keel laying to commissioning. Every component was standardized. Parts manufactured in 267 factories across 32 states arrived at the shipyard on precise schedules. Assembly proceeded 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly. German intelligence officer Fregatten-Kapitän Hans Meschel, analyzing American shipbuilding capacity in December 1943, wrote a report that Admiral Donitz initially rejected as defeatist. American escort carrier production appeared to exceed 1 unit weekly. At this rate, by mid-1944, they would possess over 100 such vessels. Each carrier negated the effectiveness of 3 to 5 U-boats. His projection indicated the U-boat force would be neutralized within 12 months. By January 1944, American escort carriers weren't merely defending convoys, but actively hunting U-boats. Hunter-killer groups centered on escort carriers prowled the Atlantic, using intelligence from ultra-intercepts to locate U-boat patrol lines. The hunted had become hunters, and German submarines found themselves trapped in an increasingly deadly environment. U-boat ace Kapitän Lieutenant Werner Henke, commanding U-515, experienced this reversal on April 9, 1944. Operating north of the Azores, U-515 was located by aircraft from USS Guadalcanal. Henke, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and credited with sinking 26 ships, found himself helpless against coordinated air and surface attack. His final radio message conveyed unprecedented desperation. Multiple aircraft were attacking. He couldn't remain surfaced. He couldn't escape while submerged. Batteries were failing. Chlorine gas was filling the boat. A destroyer was bearing down. Then came his final word indicating the boat's end. The escort carrier Guadalcanal and her hunter-killer group had revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Operating independently of convoys, they could pursue U-boat contacts for days. During this patrol alone, Guadalcanal's group would sink 3 U-boats and damage 2 others. The carrier's aircraft flew 2,484 hours in 30 days. German submarines that had once stalked the Atlantic now cowered beneath the waves, hunted relentlessly. American production's technical superiority extended beyond mere numbers. Each escort carrier incorporated lessons learned from previous operations. Casablanca-class ships built in late 1943 featured improved radar, better communication systems, stronger flight decks, and enhanced crew habitability. German observers who expected American mass production to mean inferior quality discovered the opposite. Kapitän Sauce Klaus Schultz, analyzing captured American technical documents in February 1944, reported to U-boat command about the assembly techniques Americans employed that should have been impossible. Entire sections were prefabricated, complete with installed equipment and wiring. These sections, weighing up to 200 tons, were lifted by cranes and welded together. Ships took shape in weeks rather than months. Each vessel benefited from lessons learned on previous hulls. By March 1944, the psychological transformation of the U-boat force was complete. Crews that once competed for tonnage sunk now celebrated mere survival. Morale collapsed as experienced crews recognized their situation had become hopeless. With over 50 escort carriers operational and more launching monthly, nowhere in the Atlantic remained beyond aircraft reach. The numbers confirmed this transformation starkly. In May 1943, before escort carriers became fully operational, U-boats sank 50 Allied ships. By May 1944, with over 60 escort carriers active, U-boats sank only 5 ships while losing 25 submarines. The exchange ratio had reversed so completely that Dönitz considered suspending operations entirely. USS Block Island exemplified the evolution of escort carrier tactics. Operating with 4 destroyer escorts, Block Island pioneered night operations using radar-equipped Avengers. On May 29, 1944, Block Island's aircraft located U-549 on the surface at night. The subsequent coordinated attack demonstrated American precision perfectly. Aircraft maintained contact while vectoring destroyers to the submarine's position. When U-549 dived, sonobuoys tracked its underwater movement. The submarine fought desperately, managing to torpedo Block Island before being destroyed. Block Island's loss, one of only 6 escort carriers lost during the war, illustrated American industrial supremacy rather than German success. Block Island was replaced by 2 escort carriers within weeks. Her aircraft and crew transferred to other carriers with barely a pause in operations. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz confronted this reality in a staff conference on June 2, 1944. The transcript reveals his complete understanding. The enemy's small carriers had eliminated their tactical advantages. They couldn't operate on the surface by day due to aircraft. They couldn't operate on the surface by night due to radar. The Americans hadn't defeated their submarines through superior tactics, but through making submarine operations impossible. By August 1944, the United States Navy operated 77 escort carriers, with 35 more under construction. These ships had moved beyond convoy protection to become offensive weapons. Operating off the European coast, escort carriers supported the Normandy invasion and hunted U-boats in the Bay of Biscay. German coastal U-boat bases previously immune to naval attack now faced carrier aircraft striking from beyond the range of land-based fighters. Technical evolution continued throughout 1944. The Commencement Bay class, larger and faster than the Casablancas, began entering service. These ships displaced 11,373 tons and could make 19 knots. Their flight decks stretched 553 feet. Each ship cost $11 million and required 8 months to build, still a fraction of fleet carrier cost and time. German naval intelligence struggled to comprehend the industrial capacity these ships represented. Corvette and Captain Ernst Haschigen, analyzing American production in September 1944, calculated that each escort carrier required 30,000 tons of steel, 2,000 miles of electrical cable, 50 miles of piping, 80,000 blueprints, and 45,000 different components. Yet Americans produced them like automobiles. Seattle-Tacoma Shipbuilding alone had delivered 16 carriers in 18 months. Captain Daniel Gallery, commanding USS Guadalcanal, achieved the ultimate demonstration of escort carrier dominance on June 4, 1944. His hunter-killer group forced U-505 to the surface and captured it intact, marking the first enemy warship captured at sea by the United States Navy since 1815. The submarine's seizure demonstrated conclusively that U-boats had become prey rather than predators. The statistics of transformation were overwhelming. In 1942, before escort carriers became operational, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships totaling 6,266,000 tons. In 1944, with escort carriers dominating the Atlantic, U-boats sank 132 ships totaling 773,000 tons while losing 249 submarines. German recognition of this transformation appeared in unexpected places. Admiral Friedeberg, during surrender negotiations, noted that American escort carriers operated approximately 4,000 aircraft, exceeding the entire German Luftwaffe's strength in 1944. The pilots, trained in programs producing 35,000 naval aviators annually, outnumbered total German U-boat crews by a factor of 3. Vice Admiral Lionel Wells, analyzing escort carrier effectiveness after the war, concluded that the escort carrier program represented the perfect convergence of industrial capacity, tactical innovation, and strategic necessity. They built merchant ships that could launch aircraft, trained civilians to fly them, and fundamentally changed naval warfare's nature. The human dimension was captured in the interrogation of Kapitän-Leutnant Wolfgang Haider, captured from U-575 in March 1944. He explained how escort carriers had killed the U-boat force through sheer presence. They were everywhere, always. U-boats spent entire patrols submerged, seeing nothing. Men went mad from the stress. Those little carriers Americans built in weeks had destroyed the elite of German naval power. Admiral Royal Ingersoll, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, testified to Congress in March 1945 that the escort carrier program succeeded beyond wildest expectations. They had anticipated these carriers would help protect convoys. Instead, they eliminated the submarine threat entirely. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not by destroyers or patrol aircraft, but by these converted merchant ships. The German Navy's final assessment came from Gross Admiral Dönitz in his farewell address to the U-boat force on May 4, 1945. He told them they had fought gallantly against overwhelming odds. The enemy's production of aircraft carriers had made their struggle hopeless. Americans built carriers faster than Germans could build submarines, trained pilots faster than they could train crews, and covered the ocean with aircraft. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of the achievement. These ships flew over 460,000 combat sorties during the war. Their aircraft sank or participated in sinking 53 U-boats and 17 Japanese submarines. They provided air cover for every major amphibious operation after 1943. Only 6 American escort carriers were lost to enemy action. The Kaiser shipyards that produced most escort carriers became symbols of American manufacturing power. Workers who had never built ships before the war were launching carriers at rates peacetime professionals considered impossible. Women comprised 27% of the workforce, African Americans another 15%. This diverse workforce produced carriers that swept German submarines from the sea. Captain Eric Brown, a British test pilot who flew from numerous American escort carriers, provided perspective on the revolution they represented. Germans mocked these ships because they didn't understand what they represented. One escort carrier was vulnerable. 50 escort carriers were invincible. Americans grasped this principle. Germans never did until too late. Fregattenkapitän Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most successful U-boat ace before his capture in 1941, watched the transformation from prisoner camps. He reflected that Germans failed to understand that Americans approached war as an industrial problem. While Germans focused on tactics and crew quality, Americans focused on production and coverage. The escort carriers weren't better ships individually. They were the right ships in the right numbers. German U-boat veteran Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, who commanded U-96, reflected in 1975 that the escort carriers taught them humility. Germans thought war was about warrior skill and superior tactics. Americans showed them war was about industrial capacity and systematic coverage. Those little carriers they mocked represented something they never understood: the ability to transform any problem into a production solution. Rear Admiral Calvin Durgin, who commanded escort carrier task groups, summarized the achievement simply. They took merchant hulls, added flight decks, and changed naval history. Germans laughed because they saw converted merchantmen. Americans saw mobile airfields that could be anywhere, anytime. Germans counted ships. Americans counted coverage area. The final irony came from Adolf Hitler himself, who in April 1945 reportedly asked Dönitz why the U-boats were failing. Dönitz explained about the escort carriers. Hitler allegedly asked why Germany hadn't built such vessels. Dönitz replied that Germany couldn't build one per week. Hitler had no response to this reality. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered, the United States Navy operated 105 escort carriers, with more still under construction. These ships had transformed the Atlantic into an Allied lake. The U-boat force that had nearly starved Britain was itself starved of operational space. Many late-war U-boats never fired a torpedo in anger, spending their entire careers hiding from carrier aircraft. Statistical analysis confirmed the complete transformation. In 1942, a U-boat had a 75% chance of returning from patrol. By early 1945, the survival rate dropped to 25%. The primary cause was aircraft, predominantly from escort carriers. Of 40,000 German U-boat sailors, 30,000 died, representing a 75% casualty rate. Most died after escort carriers made submarine operations essentially suicidal. These men were sacrificed to a strategic misconception that American industrial capacity couldn't overcome German tactical expertise. Commander George Chamberlain, who served aboard USS Guadalcanal, offered his perspective on the victory. Americans weren't better sailors than Germans. U-boat crews were incredibly brave and skilled. But Americans had endless carriers with endless aircraft. For every submarine Germany built, America countered with a carrier that could hunt it. It wasn't fair, he admitted. It wasn't supposed to be fair. The escort carrier program cost approximately $1.5 billion in the 1940s currency. This investment destroyed U-boat forces while saving countless Allied merchant ships. Each escort carrier cost about $7 million and could protect convoys worth hundreds of millions while destroying submarines worth millions more. Workers at Kaiser shipyards expressed pride in their achievement decades later. Rosie Devlin, a welder who worked on 12 escort carriers, explained they knew those ships weren't pretty. They were basic and simple, but they also knew the ships worked. Every carrier they launched meant convoys would arrive safely. They were fighting the war with rivet guns and welding torches. The final accounting was stark and undeniable. Germany began the war with 57 operational U-boats and built 1,162 more. They lost 785 U-boats total, with 632 lost to Allied action. Approximately 175 were destroyed by escort carrier aircraft or hunter-killer groups. Considering escort carriers only became fully operational in mid-1943, this represented extraordinary effectiveness in just 2 years of operations. Starting with 0 escort carriers in 1941, the United States built 151 by 1945. These ships operated approximately 4,500 aircraft at peak strength. They flew over 460,000 sorties and fundamentally changed naval warfare while maintaining an operational rate exceeding 80%. German U-boat commander Herbert Werner, one of the few to survive the entire war, provided perhaps the most succinct summary of what happened. The escort carriers killed them through superior presence. U-boats could avoid individual ships, but not systematic coverage. Every carrier Americans launched shrunk German operational area until finally they had nowhere to go but down. The transformation from German contempt to despair occurred in less than 18 months, a remarkably brief period. This rapid reversal demonstrated that industrial warfare operated on different timescales than traditional military planning anticipated. While Germany slowly improved submarine technology, America rapidly multiplied carrier production, overwhelming quality with quantity deployed at unprecedented speed. The German response, found in captured Kriegsmarine archives, reflected resignation and recognition of defeat. The American escort carrier program succeeded through brute industrial force. They built carriers faster than Germans could sink them, trained pilots faster than they could shoot them down. Germans were defeated not by better warriors, but by better factories and superior logistics. The escort carriers that German admirals laughed at in 1943 had by 1945 transformed the Atlantic from a U-boat hunting ground into an Allied-controlled lake. These converted merchant ships accomplished what the Royal Navy's destroyers alone could not: the complete suppression of the submarine threat through overwhelming presence across every square mile of ocean. German admirals who laughed at escort carriers in 1943 lived, if they survived, to see these same vessels accepting U-boat surrenders in 1945. The transformation required less than 2 years to complete. In that brief period, American industrial capacity rewrote naval warfare rules that had existed for centuries. Where the story begins with German naval officers examining American escort carriers and laughing at their crude construction, it ends with those same officers standing silent, finally understanding that these simple ships had destroyed the U-boat force more completely than any enemy in history through the application of industrial might that transformed maritime warfare forever. The final testimony came from Gross Admiral Donitz himself, speaking to his staff as Germany surrendered, acknowledging the truth they had refused to see until too late. They lost the Battle of the Atlantic not to superior seamanship, but to superior arithmetic. Americans built escort carriers faster than Germans could comprehend the implications. Germans thought war was about warriors and their skill. Americans knew it was about production capacity and logistics. Germans were wrong in their assumptions. Americans were right in their calculations. That fundamental difference, Donitz admitted, was why Germany lost the battle for the Atlantic and ultimately the war itself.